is Life, Legacy, and Asset Protection. My name is Trish Butcher. I'm the lawyer with Butcher Health Law, and I'm here today with the partners of Highland Trust Partners, and they're a locally owned full-service financial planning firm here in Athens. They're very knowledgeable about all this stuff, so I'm really excited to take a deeper dive into asset protection with them after this presentation. So first, I want to just open telling y'all a little bit more about estate planning in general, protecting your legacy for your loved ones, your family, and we'll take it from there. So, you know, what I often hear from people is, why do I need estate planning? And it's not, what I remind people is that it's not about us. Estate planning, other than incapacity planning, which is included in all of our estate plans, of course, but estate planning in general, what happens to us after we pass away? It's not about legacy, our hard-earned assets, and it's protecting it and passing on for our loved in our family. So, it's how easy do we want to make it for them? How much do we want to preserve for them? How easy do we want to make it for them? Can we take the steps ahead of time to make it easy on the back end so that they can really just focus on being with their family and honestly, grieving, because it is after you've passed away. So today we're going to talk about several different things. So what happens if you don't have any type of estate plan? And then, of course, the 5 critical elements of a complete estate plan and how that protects your family and assets. Then after this presentation, I'm going to back up a little bit and we're going to sit down and we're going to have a conversation with Jason, Chris, and Mark, who are the partners of Highland Trust Partners, who like I said, I'm really excited to have a conversation with them and get their input, and also just to hear some really, good stories, because they have a lot of them. So if you don't have an estate plan, y'all, you're not alone. 55% of Americans don't. That's just an estimate. I've heard higher estimates. I've heard up to 70% don't. I used to be the legal counsel for the Medical Association of Georgia. So I worked with over 8,000 physicians. I was a lobbyist, wrote legislation, and I personally knew a lot of those physicians. And since I've opened this firm, I've been in touch with a lot of them. And it's amazing to me how many of them don't have estate plans. So you're not alone if you don't have one. And it's definitely something that we can quickly remedy. But it is really, really important, especially for high earners and professionals and people who own their own businesses. Extremely important to have these ducks in a row to make sure that everything you've worked so hard for is protected for your family. So what happens if you do pass away without a plan? Well, there's something called the probate process. And actually, I will throw out there that this isn't just involved if you don't have a plan. It's also involved if you have a bad plan. So there's a misconception that wills will actually avoid probate. I've actually had clients come in and tell me that they have had a lawyer tell them that, oh, I put a clause in a will saying that we don't have to go through probate, after something happens with their parent or for their kids or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And I don't know whether the attorney just didn't know any better, but in reality, that you can't contract around the law. The law is what the law is. And in Georgia, every estate has to go through probate if they have any assets at all. There's not even like a small estate exclusion plan. So what happens if you pass away with a will or without a plan at all? So all of your assets have to be gathered. Probate has to be filed with a judge. Your family will have to hire an attorney to help them through this process because it is a court process. In Georgia, the typical probate process takes about 6 to 12 months, but we're here at the tail end of, hopefully the tail end. I'm going to be positive, tail end of COVID. And probate is currently backed up 2+ years. So something that's typically not that bad is actually really bad right now in Georgia. And I've seen it all over the place from all different types of people. So basically, in lieu of your signature, you don't have a signature to sign things over to other people. The judge has to come in and he has to give them to those other people. It's a process. You have to have the administrator come in. You have to gather all of your assets. And for the record, there is over $1 billion in the Georgia Unclaimed Properties Department because of this very process of people not knowing how to get access to certain assets or not knowing what's there. So this isn't an easy process for a lot of people. In fact, if something happened to me tomorrow, I don't know that my husband would, have a super easy time if we hadn't already created a comprehensive plan, which of course we have because I'm an estate planning attorney. So, what happens if you die without a plan? It's going to go through probate process. It's going to take months and months. If there's anybody that's going to contest your estate, it's going to be contested then. It's very easy to contest during the probate process. The court process is already open. You can find attorneys that will represent you if you want to contest a will. So at that point, at the end of probate, everything's administered. That can take years and years, just depending on what the assets are and everything like that. But so basically that's what happens without a plan or even if you do have a will. So again, your heirs have to go to the probate court. There's attorney's fees, there's bond premiums, there's executor fees, there's filing fees, which in Georgia are not that expensive. They're like $150. In other states, they can be actually a percentage of your estate. So Georgia is a little friendlier in that the court process itself doesn't cost that much. But we all know that attorneys do, especially attorneys that bill hourly, which by the way, I don't. So you're also going to have any type of Medicaid estate recovery, creditors. It's a very slow, expensive process. And it's totally public. Y'all, probate is not private. Once a will has gone through probate, anybody can look up your will. They can see exactly where it's been distributed and who got all your money and all your assets, including family members that might be kind of PO'd about something. So it's very public. This is Jackie O's will. Anybody can look it up. It's not the best. It's not the best. So another thing that you have to think about is that beneficiaries are going to receive assets outright and unprotected most of the time. Now, there are testamentary trusts, which are trusts that are created via will. But why would we do that? Why would we spend extra money for trusts that then still have to go through this lengthy probate process that can be contested so easily? So most of the time, if people just have a simple will or no will at all, beneficiaries receive assets outright. And in order to receive your inheritance outright, you have to be 18 years old. So if something happens to you while your kids are still minors, the judge will appoint a financial conservator for them. And then as soon as they turn 18, slap, they get an outright check for whatever's left in the estate. And I don't know about y'all, but if I had gotten a check when I was 18 years old, I don't even want to think about where that would have gone. So not the best way to leave inheritance for your beneficiaries. And another thing to think about is what happens if they get married and don't do a very good job of picking a spouse, or they have lots and lots of student loan debt, which a lot of us have now because that's the age we're living in. So there are other ways and other things that you need to think about. Divorce, if they get divorced, we don't like to think about our kids getting a divorce, but we hear it all the time. We really like our son-in-law, or we really like our daughter-in-law, but so how can we protect these assets to make sure that anything you leave to your children aren't just given to them in a check form when they turn 18? So what about incapacity? Who's going to make your medical decisions if you're not dead? If you're in the hospital and you can't make decisions for you, if you're in a coma or you're on a ventilator with COVID, or you have surgery and you're going to be totally out of it for several weeks with medication and everything, who gets to keep your life running? A will not provide this. Now, at Butcher Health Law, all of our plans include incapacity documents. So don't think that we're ever going to leave you high and dry with this, no matter what you plan for. We're going to make sure that your incapacity is covered. So there's healthcare power of attorneys, advanced healthcare directives, or they're also known as living wills. And all of these documents make sure that your decisions, what you want, are going to be protected and provided for even while you're incapacitated. And a lot of people don't think about that with estate planning, but it's just as important, if not more important, because you're actually still alive. So you really want to make sure that your wishes are followed, and that's incapacity. So it's not included in wills, but it is going to be those ancillary documents that are included in any type of plan that we provide for you. We will never give you just a will and a high five. We're going to make sure that you're covered all around. Financial decisions. So a lot of people don't work with financial planners, and we highly recommend that you do, obviously, because I'm here talking to in a little bit, talking to some amazing financial planners. But you know, who gets to make your financial decisions if you don't necessarily have all your ducks in a row? Who's going to pay your bills? Who's going to pay your taxes? Who's going to pay your mortgage, your rent, whatever it is? Again, that's that power of attorney. So you want to make sure that you have these documents in place. And if we go a step further, and we look at revocable living trust, which I'll go into in a little more depth in a minute, but it's something that we really, really, really love working with and highly encourage people to work with because they're kind of a will alternative. There's also incapacity trustees, and these are even a step above power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney. These are people that banks will not fight, which is really awesome because I can't tell you how many times power of attorneys don't work out as they should because there's just a lot of chance for fraud. So we can take it even a step further and make sure 100% that if you're incapacitated, you're 100% covered and everything's going to keep running until you're able to jump back in it. So what about what about taxes? Taxes are something that are going to become more and more and more talked about as we move forward. And I'm not going to dive into it a lot right now. I'm going to save that a little bit more for the conversation with Jason and Chris and Mark. But estate taxes are about to drastically change. At least we think. That's all we can guess from the rhetoric that's being spoken around the White House and our new president. So President Biden has made it very clear that he wants to drop the estate tax. He'd like to get rid of the step up in basis, which is capital gains for any of your inheritance. And he'd like to raise the percentage for whatever you have that's above the estate tax level. So for example, right now it is sitting at 23 million per couple. So you know, a lot of people aren't affected by it currently. President Trump raised that to 11.5 per individual. This does sunset in 2024, regardless of who's president. So it sunsets back to the 4.5 per individual, 9 total. That was there with President Bush and President Obama. So there's been some different numbers tossed around the Biden camp, and we've heard anywhere from 1 million per individual, which I'm going to say that's probably not that low, but I've heard 3 million per individual, 3.5, but regardless, it's going to be a lot lower than that 11.5. So wills, no estate planning. Obviously, as y'all can probably assume, estate taxes, they're just going to be paid. And if you have if the estate tax is $3 million total and you have $5 million, you're looking at your estate being taxed at about $1 million going to the government, which is a huge amount of money. That's just some easy numbers to throw out. That's not necessarily what we think is going to happen. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but obviously wills, no estate planning, not going to provide or protect from this at all. So what about long-term nursing home care? It's something that a lot of us don't like to think about, especially if we're still young and we're like, oh, we don't really need to think about that. We'll think about that down the road. But the fact of the matter is that it's estimated that around 69% of people need long-term care for an average of at least 3 years. So whether it's at home health, or nursing home health is going to be even a little more expensive than nursing homes. But the average cost of long-term nursing home care in Georgia is about $5,500 a month. Now, note that's actually, in my opinion, a little low. I hear a lot of numbers tossed more around that 10,000 per month range. And so you have to remember that this is something that's extremely expensive. If you have an estate, if you have assets, this could drain it pretty quickly, especially if maybe you have Alzheimer's, and you can live for a long time with Alzheimer's. So it's something that everyone really needs to consider and work into your estate plan if that's something that you're worried about or a goal of yours. Because if you're looking to leave a legacy to your loved ones, long-term care can really knock out that legacy pretty quickly. So how is long-term care paid for? You have personal savings, your assets, everything like that. Long-term care insurance policies are becoming more and more popular again, and definitely something that we like to look at for our clients who like to maybe think about working that into their estate plan. Another thing, of course, is Medicaid benefits, but that's only once you have nothing left. So is that really to the point you want to get to? Of course, now there are ways to plan around this. There are ways to create trusts or annuities or other things that can, protect your assets and help you maybe qualify for Medicaid a little bit sooner. Again, it's really what your goals are and what works for you and your family. Of course, all of these things are basically giving your money away. So there's pros and cons to everything. And that's why you want to make sure that you're working with your financial planner and your estate planning attorney probably together in tandem is really the best way to do it, to make sure that your plan is going to cover you and meet all of your goals. So how can we avoid all of these problems? Well, basically, plan ahead. You want to protect your home, your life savings, your investments, and you definitely want to make it as easy as you possibly can for your family. So when you take action and create a plan, you're going to get to control who gets your assets. The state of Georgia doesn't control it, a judge doesn't control it, and it's going to be a lot harder for anybody to contest it. You get to keep your assets in your family. If you're a doctor, you went to medical school, you have paid a lot of money to get to where you are. You went through a lot of schooling and you've worked a lot of really long hours. You worked really hard for your assets, and you want to make sure that that legacy continues on to your family. You want to make sure that it's not lost due to addictions or divorce or just bad decisions, creditors, lawsuits, Medicaid estate recovery, regardless what it is. You want to make sure that these assets are protected during life and after, frankly. You get to control who makes decisions for you. Like I mentioned, in capacity, we're going to go above and beyond power of attorney. We're going to make sure that the people that you want to be making decisions for you are going to be making decisions for you, and never a judge. And you also want to make things as easy as possible for your family. It's why you're here. You wouldn't be here if you weren't, because like I said, after we've gone, we've gone. But we love our families and we love the people who will be inheriting our estate. And we want to make sure that it's handled privately, not publicly, that it doesn't have to go to court, and that they can have a trustee that steps in and administers the estate smoothly and according to your wishes. So the 5 elements that are going to protect you and your family and make things the easiest for your loved ones are always going to be wills. There will always be wills in every estate plan. What type of will depends upon what plan you get. Like I said, we highly recommend living trust. They're a will alternative. It makes it very easy for your family to administer the estate. We're going to go ahead and compile all of your assets, make sure the trustee knows exactly what's there. It's going to be very comprehensive planning. So a will is just there as kind of that just in case clause, just in case something gets left out of that living trust. Here's a will, put everything back in it. But if you work with me, the goal is to hopefully avoid having to do that, period. We're going to have power of attorneys, healthcare directives, healthcare power of attorneys, asset protection plan, and irrevocable trust for loved ones. If you're really going for that really awesome, all-inclusive, comprehensive plan that is going to work no matter what. And that is our goal. I don't ever want to slap my clients with 200 pages of documents and say, okay, well, everything's right legally, so good luck, go out and get it done. We're going to be there every step of the way, making sure, working with your financial planner, working with your family to make sure that everything's handled and taken care of. So how do you calculate your estate? Well, there's 2 different types of estates, technically. There's a probate estate, and then there's a estate tax estate. So your estate tax estate is what's looking at that estate tax, that federal estate tax. Georgia does not have an estate tax, so it's just federal here. And basically, it's exactly what does your family get? What assets do they get? The equity of your estate. So life insurance policies, retirement accounts, all of these are thrown into your estate tax. The equity in your house, the equity in any vacation homes, investment accounts, everything like that is going to be thrown into your estate tax estate. For probate estate, it's a little bit different. Typically, beneficiary designated items stay out. So life insurance policies, retirement accounts stay out unless you have minor children and you don't provide for it. Then they get also thrown right back into probate. So that's really important to note. Otherwise, it's the value of your estate, not your equity. So it's whatever your house is worth. So if it's $1 million house, but you still have a $500,000 mortgage on it, doesn't matter. It's $1 million for the sake of probate estate. Your cars, your bank accounts, everything like that. Everything's included, but it's the value of your estate, not your equity, whereas the estate tax is the equity and always includes life insurance and 401ks and IRAs. Probate estate will only include life insurance and 401ks if it's left to a minor and there's no trust to catch those assets and it's left to a minor instead. So a will, again, is going to express your wishes, control your assets titled in your name. It's going to be enforced by a probate court. It does require that probate. A judge has to be involved in the process, but assets don't have to be moved on the front end. It's just written down. A living trust, again, it's going to express your wishes, control assets held in the trust. It's going to avoid that probate as long as it is funded correctly, which again, we work very closely with our clients to make sure they are always funded. And it's really important that you find an attorney that will do this, because a lot of attorneys form your trust. It might be a great trust and perfectly written legally, but if it's not funded, it's not going to work. So that is the downfall of a trust. It has to be properly funded in advance. But think of it this way. It's easier for you to do it up front than it's going to be for somebody not you to come in and try and get all your assets together and do it on the back end with a judge. So let's do it up front and let's avoid that probate. It avoids conflict. Trusts are not easy to contest. And it's going to be an immediate and easy transition to heirs. No waiting 6 to 12 to 2 years. 6 to 12 months to 2 years for probate process. It's going to be immediate. As soon as the trustee can step in, they can start administering all of those assets. It's also going to be just a lot more flexible, y'all. You can do whatever you want in a trust. We can get creative with it. Wills, pretty straightforward. So revocable living trusts, you retitle houses, LLCs, bank accounts, everything like that, investments, and then we make the trust your beneficiary, your second beneficiary, typically for life insurance and 401ks and retirement accounts. So you don't have to retitle. The trust won't own any retirement accounts or life insurance. It's going to become that contingent beneficiary. So we've already gone over power of attorney, healthcare directives. So let's really move into asset protection planning. So what is asset protection planning? How is it kind of a step above? Well, this is what a lot of people who are high earners, who own businesses, who have families that have special needs beneficiaries. This is something that really needs to be kind of front and center in their estate planning. It needs to be more comprehensive. It's making sure your family assets stay in the family by leaving your inheritance in trust for your heirs. It's creating a comprehensive and personalized estate plan that accomplishes your goals. And it doesn't just include estate planning. That's why it's so important to work with financial planners, because it's going to incorporate trust, life insurance, and financial planning. So it's going to really need to be your attorney working with your financial planner to make sure that your plan is perfect for your family. So they really need to work together to make this happen. It needs to be comprehensive to really work for your family. And there are a lot of options that don't include offshore trust accounts, for the record. I know that that's what it's in all the movies, but we can do some better options that aren't in the Bahamas. So do you have minor children? Really quickly, it's extra important to do this if you have minor children. People think that you don't need to do estate planning till later in life, but y'all, minor children are your most important assets. Always, always, always. So it's really important to protect your minor children. So we have lifetime asset protection trusts that make sure their inheritance is going to stay protected for life from creditors, divorce, and spouses. We have these revocable living trusts, these buckets that catch your assets to make sure that they don't have a financial conservator appointed by a judge, that they don't get a check at 18, that your retirement and life insurance flow into a trust versus to minor children. We have kids protection plans, and I am the only attorney in Athens that can actually do a kids protection plan as a certified personal family lawyer. There are no other attorneys in Athens that offer this. And this is what's going to include emergency guardians, permanent guardians, and minor medical power of attorney and ID cards for your wallet. We're going to make sure that they're 100% covered versus just naming guardians. And then also, we're going to make sure that your children inherit when you want them to, not with a check at 18. So asset protection with trusts. We have irrevocable trusts, and it's really important to note that trusts are always private. Always. So no public probate. We have irrevocable trusts. We have family and marital trusts, which can protect in the event that one spouse passes away or that we're looking at estate tax. There's lots of different ways that we can work this into your estate plan that will be beneficial for a lot of different reasons. Lifetime asset protection trusts are those trusts that you leave to your beneficiaries. Instead of ever giving them money outright that sits in their bank account, instead they'll have their inheritance in a trust that will grow with them for life. They can invest that money. They can become co-trustee. They become only trustee, but it will protect them from debt, student loans, divorce, spouses, everything like that. There's charitable trusts. That's a very common way to leave money to charities and make sure that it's used the way you would want it to use and protect it from that estate tax. And then there's also something called a SLAT, which is a spousal lifetime asset trust. Y'all, I'm not going to get very into this right now. It's a pretty complex trust, but it's a way to create a lifetime asset protection trust, basically while you're still alive for your spouse. Georgia isn't the best place to do this. So typically this would involve co-counseling with someone in Tennessee who has really great trust laws. Who knew? So asset protection with financial planning. This is when I get to say, let's see what the experts have to say about asset ownership, life insurance and annuities, limited liability entities, and basically how financial planning plays a role outside of just trust and everything like that. In irrevocable trust. So I'm going to do a deeper dive. I'm going to bring in the Highland Trust Partners, Mark, Jason, and Chris, and I'm going to ask them some questions. I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about asset protection. So I'm going to take a step back here. Welcome, gentlemen. Jason Norton with Highland Trust Partners, Chris Caldwell, and Mark Cross. All three kind of play a slightly different role within Highland Trust Partners here in Athens, but they're all extremely awesome at what they do. And I'm going to let them take it away. So welcome. Thanks for agreeing to do this presentation with me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Trish.
Yeah. So I think I'm just going to ask y'all some questions and let y'all, use your experience. Highland Trust Partners was founded, I think, what,
6 years ago this month.
Yeah. And I mean, y'all have been doing some good work.
Thank you. Busy.
So I'm going to just ask them some questions and let them go off of their experience and maybe tell some good stories along the way and find out more about asset protection from the financial planning side. So we're going to start with you, Chris. I talked a little bit about life insurance and annuities. Outside of, just the typical asset protection trust. So is life insurance and annuities a good planning tactic for asset protection?
It could be. It definitely could be part of someone's estate plan, part of their financial plan. One thing as far as asset protection that some people don't realize, particularly in the state of Georgia, when it comes down to life insurance and annuities, is that cash value, surrender value is protected from creditors. So if you're at risk of a creditor's attacking assets, it could be a place that you want to hold some assets for that reason. So we'll see people with life insurance policies have significant cash value and they're considered using something different with the cash value, taking it out. And one thing we may want to look at, depending on the personal situation, is whether we want to leave it intact just as a credit protection, for example. So that's one thing for sure. Another piece you talked about a minute ago with trust and ILAs, which we didn't go into too deeply, protecting for taxes, is that of course, if we have the estate tax limit drop down from 22.3 million now to whatever they come up with, it could be something we want to look at again as far as insurance covering what that estate tax could be. Mm-hmm. So we definitely want to. We did that years ago when I first got into the business, if you will, in the mid-90s. We were at $650,000 per person. So we did a lot of trust planning and life insurance planning around paying estate taxes back then. And of course, hasn't had to worry that much about it recently, but that could change significantly for business owners, families, and the like. So definitely something we want to look at as far as life insurance to cover estate taxes and really any insurance in general. So you mentioned earlier about long-term care, disability, a business that may, a doctor with malpractice, a business owner with their with any other business insurance they have, just to make sure it's all about protecting assets. It's all about protecting what somebody else can take from you, whether it's being sued or creditor or the IRS. So if we can come up with strategies around life insurance, annuities, or other things that may be for some, not for all, that could help protect them and their families and their businesses, that's definitely what we want to look at. And of course, with businesses, we do a lot of buy sells, helping business owners with buy sell agreements, which for death and or disability are funded by some type of insurance in most cases. So it's very important to look at that for your business.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that Chris mentioned the estate tax being $650,000 per person. And just to put that into, clarity on how much the estate tax can change per president, that was President Clinton. So I mean, I remember President Clinton very clearly when he, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. So every president, depending on whether they have a majority of the House and Senate, could make really drastic changes.
And you mentioned with your stepfather's meeting last week, it was lower than 650.
Yeah, at one point it was 400,000.
400,000.
So yeah, I mean, so we're talking that it's so high right now that it's almost a joke, but for a lot of people, but it hasn't always been that way. So it's going to come back. It's going to become really important to consider things like life insurance and annuities as we're moving forward with this estate tax. So, Chris, do you recommend retitling assets for estate or asset protection purposes?
Potentially, with, of course, advice from good legal counsel. We definitely want an attorney with us as we go through this. But when we do a financial plan for a family, one thing we dive into first is, of course, all their assets and liabilities and how they're titled. We run an estate report just to see what's under one individual's name, the husband versus the wife, or what's joint between the two. So, and what's owned by other entities like trust or LLCs and things such as that. So we want to make sure that they have things that are titled correctly. Just back to what I said with insurance, just on protection. So if they're sued, or if a creditor comes after them, or if they have an event in their life that could actually touch those assets at some point, that they got entitlement correctly, that could be more prevalent. Again, going back to the state taxes, there's I know plenty of examples of say a business owner that has the business in his name, or some of the partnerships in his name, and then a lot of other assets are also in his or her name. And looking at the equalization of assets, one side's going to be hit with estate taxes potentially if it drops versus the other. So as Trish has told everyone, and most people know, each person gets a number. They have their limit. So if hypothetically, disclaimer, if state taxes went to $5 million and we ran your balance sheet, your net worth statement, and you as the owner of a business and other properties, and you're at 6 million, she's at 2, there needs to be some work done to split assets a little bit differently to come underneath for both of you that number to protect you from taxes.
Or create some special trust. Yeah,
exactly.
So there's lots of different ways. But it's extremely important. And that often is how it is, because like you said, one spouse is a business owner, or one spouse is a medical professional or a higher earning professional that faces a certain amount of liability. And so there's a lot of times that it's kind of uneven if it's split between the two. So Mark, I'm going to jump over to you because you deal a lot with trust. So how does establishing a trust help protect a family's assets?
Well, the trust sets a precedent for the family as far as how things are going to function and work. If you have a blended family, then got a lot of different stakeholders, and it allows you and your spouse to direct how you want your assets to be divided and when. Also, the trust vehicle is important if you have a child who's special needs. And special needs, we think of somebody with, I guess, Down syndrome or something like that. But nowadays, with the problems we're having in society with drugs and alcohol abuse, you have some young adults and older people that you just don't want to drop $100,000, $1 million, $2 million into their lap based on decisions they've made in the past or where they are in their life. So the trust is a key, and to be considered with every family, regardless of how complex things are in your mind.
Yeah. That's very true. It's really important. And we're going to actually jump into special needs in a second. But first, Mark, one more question. What are some of the issues that you see families encounter when it's time to settle a parent's estate? Because I know you have some really good stories on this one.
Yeah, so you know, everybody gets along fine as long as mom and dad are there to referee. And then an issue, you know, I picked on my little sister when she was 10, since to raise its head when mom and dad are no longer around to mediate and make everybody behave. So what we're seeing traditionally is there's typically one child that is anointed the one to be the executor, be the trustee, settle the estate, and the other siblings it end up coming, you know, at them because the estate's not being settled quick enough, fast enough. If you have a child that needs a special needs trust, then the trustee, if it's a family member, particularly their big brother or little brother in some cases, it puts them at conflict. So we really need to think, you know, through the dynamics of the family, and the parents need to have a trust protector, have a member of the family, their CPA, their attorney, that can help direct whoever the trustee is, whether it's a family member, a corporate trustee, so that the burden doesn't fall on one person. And when you have that trust protector or the backup of a corporate trustee, it allows that the parent, for the child that's wanting to care for a child or help the other child, really be able to take a step back if things get hostile. Because when you start injecting money into the situation, it really changes how Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner go. And so don't put your child in your anointed child in a position of really running herd over a sibling. Build in the safe gaps in your plan.
We call them the tap out provisions.
Yes.
Always build in tap out provisions, because if we all know that money can make people be a little funny. So we you want to always make sure that there's a tap out for them to protect the family and that unity that you have before the money became an issue. So
it's important that the family knows your intentions and knows what's coming. If they know what you want, and they might not necessarily agree 100% with it, but if you're direct in your communication, it makes things go smoother, and there are no questions. And there'll be questions, but it'll make it go smooth.
People are already primed for what's going to happen. I think that's really important, especially for families that have older children, to sit down and have that conversation. So just real quick, we think, oh, this would never happen to our family. We all love each other. We're all really close. How often do you see something like this happen?
Every time. Every single time. We've got 5 or 6 going right now that would be a head shaker. And it could be over the silverware and the china. It could be over dividends. It could be over, gifts that were made out of the kindness of the parent's heart. It could be the bugle that was played at grandmother's funeral. It takes on all shapes and sizes, and every family goes through some hiccups.
But if they had the conversation, it's still easier. Yes. So if they did it ahead of time, there's still maybe a little, but it's not as bad as the other side.
And can be a lot cheaper given the fact or the propensity to sue.
Yes.
In the estate.
And
a lot cheaper.
And if you include your estate attorney like Trish, your CPA, your financial advisor, the stakeholders that are really going to referee and be part of this in the process, then we're going to go out of our way to, 1, meet your wishes, but 2, be an advocate for your children or grandchildren into what's best for them.
Yeah.
Because we know the family. We know the family a lot of times better than most.
It's creating that team of trusted advisors versus just hiring one-off planners or one-off attorneys that don't really get to know your family or, you know, aren't really involved in the process. I think that's really important. So y'all have mentioned, both of y'all have mentioned, you know, how important it is, especially if you have a special needs beneficiary. So I'm going to jump over to Jason. So this is kind of like your specialty. This is something that you hold very near and dear to your heart. So what are some steps that we could take in asset protection for families that have special needs beneficiaries?
So I think that, and having a son with special needs, the one thing that I've learned, period, end of story, is prepare before it happens. And so when a lot of times there could be scenarios where we can go get a will and we can change things and we can update. With a special needs child, you really need to think 5, 10, 15 years out. And we have these moments, and there's different ages, whether it be the age of diagnosis, whether it be transitions in school, whether it be aging out of school, finding yourself where you're no longer excluded from an income standpoint. These are all these moments where it's re-inventory, make pertinent decisions, but you really have to start thinking about those beforehand. And the way that I explain it is that a plane doesn't just fly over the runway and then hit it. It has to start down its glide path. And so when we're start talking about successful special needs planning, the conversation continues year in and year out, and it starts early. So I think that that in itself is an asset protector. Understanding the dynamic of the family, understanding if something was to happen to the parents, who would be in charge of, you know, the financial power of attorney, who's in, you know, who's the trust off, you know, who's in charge of the trust, the trustee, and then ultimately who's going to be the guardian of the child as well, and preparing those people around you. Pandemic was a fantastic, unfortunately, example of what happens when we have to plan before.
Yeah. And it's important to note that beneficiaries aren't always born with special needs. Sometimes those special needs happen later because of an accident or a traumatic brain injury or an illness or something like that. So it's always important to remember that this is something that can pop up later in life, unfortunately, and we don't ever want to think about that happening, but the potential's there. I mean, people get in car accidents, you know, so it's also really important to make it a special needs trust also available on a as needed, like a trigger almost. So like if you create a lifetime asset protection trust for your kid, you can have it so that it can spring into a special needs trust if it ever needed to, heaven forbid. But we all know that if you remember the umbrella, it never rains. So you might as well just go ahead and plan for it. And you're preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. But it's always really important to have it in place just in case it's ever needed. So with special needs trusts, you know, there's two different types of special needs trusts. Can you explain the difference between these two types and why one might be better than the other?
Right, and so that really goes into the idea of planning ahead, right? So if I'm planning ahead, I can create what's called a third-party supplemental or special needs trust. And in that third-party supplemental special needs trust, the assets will never find the beneficiary's hands to begin with. And what we're trying to do in this type using a third party is that typically when there's a special needs situation, whether it be early onset or whether it be later, we do qualify for government benefits. And those are very, very important, whether it be a Medicaid supplement to your primary health insurance, because believe it or not, there are holes in primary health insurance. You know, typically 40 visits a year, and we can use those pretty quickly, and Medicaid can step in. But what ends up happening on a third party, so the money never made it to the beneficiary, when the beneficiary passes away, what's left of the trust gets distributed. And so we want to avoid that as much as possible, because let's be it's very expensive having a special needs child, extremely expensive. And then a lot of times, from an estate planning standpoint, there's going to be an unequal estate. If you have typically developed children, the special needs child is going to cost more, therefore leaving less for them. And so I think that it's very important that we plan ahead any way we possibly can and hope to not use it, then have to go look backwards, be able to have Medicaid step in, and therefore taking away an asset that could go to siblings, charity, organizations, anything that you would rather send it to other than the federal government.
Yeah. Anybody other than the federal government. So we've talked a lot about life insurance. Now, can life insurance play a role in special needs Medicaid planning as well?
So life insurance is actually extremely important. And that's where the plan comes in too, because we want to make sure that the family has the right amount of life insurance, not too much and not too little. You know, too much and we can't afford the premiums and we're having to sacrifice other places. Too little and we can't add that perpetuity, you know, that the family would need. And income replacement is such a huge part of financial planning. And so, you know, I think that making sure that we have the life insurance component, make sure that, like I said, we can add some level of perpetuity to the income stream for, you know, for the special needs child or adult, and therefore allowing other assets, you know, to help protect surviving spouse, surviving siblings.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that would be definitely really important. And I know Chris kind of mentioned it earlier, but so that's where a life insurance, like a special life insurance trust and ILET would actually, you know, be really beneficial as well. So there's lots of different types of trusts that you can incorporate into an estate plan to make it as comprehensive as possible. So really important with special needs beneficiaries and having to deal with Medicaid and government benefits and anything like that. So in the kind of prenups, blended families. So let's talk about divorce, because unfortunately divorce does happen a lot. It's not uncommon, and sometimes it actually tends to be a really good thing. So Mark, what?
No comment.
It's a whole other meeting now.
Greater good. Okay.
Conversation for another time. Is there a role for life insurance to offer asset protection when a family is going through divorce? Is there, you know, how can we help protect families from divorce and, you know, and help provide for?
Yeah, so when a family unfortunately finds themselves going through divorce, and I say family because it affects the children, not only just the two spouses separating, but the extended family, it's extremely important, one, that you do a financial plan because everything just changed in your whole world. But life insurance is a tremendous vehicle to put in place if something happens to your spouse, as far as the child support, alimony payment, that the insurance can step in and fill that void.
Yeah.
It's imperative in the process.
And you're seeing it used more and more in divorce settlements as a requirement.
And hate to be the bearer of bad news, but in all honesty, estate plans probably have to drastically change when someone gets a divorce, because you've typically named your spouse to every important role, and that's probably no longer going to be the case. I mean, I guess some people keep a really good relationship with their ex-spouse, but more often than not, we're not going to see that. So I mean, it's going to have to change. You know, so unfortunately, there's really very little that we can do to plan around that. And but it is something that you can still make provisions for in other ways. And then you're still going to have to call me and we're still going to have to interstate plan. So sorry about that.
But the important thing is you match your divorce decree with your financial plan with your legal documents, because everything just got turned upside down. It's an emotionally tough time, but while everything's on the table is the time to address it, button it up, and then come back 3 years later for a tune-up or on your financial plan. But everything's on the table, and you know all your assets and where you are, it's time to take a look at it because it will help protect.
And as Jason mentioned, pre-planning divorce, don't forget if you're a business owner, that's a vital part of your buy-sell agreement, because it's too late to go in and say, I need to change my agreement to where when I'm divorced, my ex can't get into the business and own a percentage of the business now, which could essentially sometimes ruin the business. So if that has to be a big conversation when you're going through your buy-sell agreement too as a business owner.
Well, and the level of financial literacy too that can take place. You know, typically we do find that there's one person in the family who's more financial literate than the other. And, you know, going through that idea of financial planning really kind of levels that playing field for the other spouse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I see it all the time, and I'm sorry, gentlemen, but most often from a family standpoint, I see a lot of women that run all of the home accounts and everything like that. And you have to think of it, you know, even in just the simplest terms. If something was to happen to me, would my husband know how to access all of our online accounts? What does he even know how many credit cards we have? You know, there's a lot of different things that you have to plan for. And again, creating a family will have everything kind of lined up so that of course, a lot of times people remarry, there's kids from both marriages, it's the Brady Bunch. So how can estate planning, can life insurance, can things like that, can it make it that process as easy as possible? Because oftentimes that can just be a disaster, trying to provide for these kids and those kids and make sure that everything's covered and not leave it all to your new spouse and then your kids get left out. Like,
yeah, so life insurance is a great way to do estate equalization. It can be held in a trust, and if you have minor children, then you can fund their future needs, college, taking care of them. But you also don't want your spouse, if something happens to you, to be moved out of your marital home. Have someone walk in and say, well, that was a gift you gave mom, that new couch, and so that's hers and I'm taking it. Or take the pictures off the wall, or you know, the silverware that they're eating on every day. I mean, you really need to think beyond just financially how they can be taken care of, but having the little things buttoned up so that everybody communicates and understands.
yeah. So we're gonna go back to Chris for the last couple of questions here, and all of this stuff is so in depth. So please remember that, you know, this is a very broad overview of all of these issues that, you know, we can't go into a lot of in depth, and frankly, I can't give legal advice to you anyhow because you're most likely not my client. So, you know, so just remember that this gets really way more complicated, and this is why we highly don't recommend doing it yourself. Save your DIY projects for your house with proper YouTube supervision, and really work with experts on all this, because y'all, it gets really complicated. So Chris, let's jump back to you. You've mentioned business owners a couple times. Why is this all so much more important if you own a business? Because it takes that next level of importance.
Well, if you're a business owner, when we do a financial plan for a business owner, assets, their home is their business. I'm putting my money back through retirement years, but it is in a lot of cases a retirement plan. So if that is their retirement, they need to make sure they've done everything humanly possible to protect it for retirement for them and their family, for that matter. So what a buy-sell agreement can do, which it's not even, it's a requirement, it should be. It protects against what I call the 4 Ds of risk in a business for business owners: death, disability, divorce, and dissolvement. So any of those 4 events can disrupt a business owner's life. Well, death, there is no life left, but it can disrupt their family. It can disrupt the business as a whole, which, think about all the stakeholders in the business. When I talk to business owners about what do they really love in their business? One of the first things to jump into is employees. So what we talk about is that you talk about extended, a thing you can do that can extend beyond you to impact other people's lives. If without proper plan and proper buy-sell agreement, it could destroy the business as a whole. And that destroys everybody who works in the business with their finances as well. They're out of a job. So what we really talk about with ownership in a business and how we move forward with planning with it is to really dig deep into not just the financials, but all the other things that's important to you to run this business, and how do you want it to operate over the rest of your life.
Yeah. And, business succession planning is something that's really important as well. And that's both going to be on that side as well as the estate planning side. You want to make sure that your business is still profitable by the time that your family has the ability to do whatever is necessary to sell it, to buy out from it with a partner, or to sell it to somebody. And to do that, you want to make sure that it's not going through probate, because if your business has to go through probate, whoo, that's a whole that's a disaster waiting to happen. So, and buy-sell agreements, a lot of the times those buy-sell agreements are funded by life insurance. So again, life insurance, it plays a bigger role than a lot of people realize.
And it's one thing to have a buy-sell agreement. It's another thing to have it funded and have the liquidity to execute.
I'm going to ask one last question here to kind of finish it out. So a lot of, I'm from the Medical Association of Georgia, so I've worked a lot with medical professionals, and obviously they are a very, typically a high earning profession that has a lot of liability attached and things like that. So Chris, last question, are there any special planning suggestions you may have for those in the medical field?
So, and you mentioned a lot of that has to do with high earning.
Other than work with me, by
the way. So what the medical community is really good at is making sure their malpractice is taken care of, right? That's probably one of the only things they learn in medical school about business is malpractice insurance. So, they're a high earning profession. If you own your own business, you put a lot of money back into your business sometimes too. So there's different things that a MD or a dentist or orthodontist may do a little bit differently than most people, but it's really you're a business owner in the most part, or maybe you work for a hospital, maybe you W-2 through a hospital. But if you're a business owner in a medical profession, you just got to take the steps to make sure of all the risks all the liabilities that are out there against you from creditors to is taking care of your personal property versus your business property. Making sure your umbrella coverage is really good at home. Just make sure that you have a career that people will attack you quickly. It's doing a really deep dive of all the clients that we feel, or particularly I feel really good on a full financial plan, going through everything from liability, risk, insurance, taxes, investment management, asset protection in different capacities. Doctors are one that we feel sometimes don't do maybe as good of a job at doing that, but definitely need to take the time and energy to go into this. Protecting their spouse in a lot of cases, or families, of course, and it's even things like an asset protection is super funding ERISA plans, retirement plans at work through your business practice. So some practices don't have plans that offer a lot of ability to put high contribution rates into for them, but that's a place you can shelter some money a little bit away from creditors. So and they don't think about that.
I think it's. Have you worked with a professional to help you look under the rocks that you didn't know existed? Have you checked all the boxes? I know that we have a list of over 100 places that we look in financial planning. That's a long list, but not all of them are going to be applicable to everyone. But have we asked the question? And so you never know by asking the question. You say, I may have an inheritance coming from a set of grandparents that I didn't tell you about because I didn't think you needed to know. Well, yeah, we need to know that because that's going to ultimately could lead to an estate issue for you. And so, can we get a head start on that rock?
Yeah, agreed. for medical professionals, from my standpoint of having had two grandfathers that were doctors and an uncle and an adopted endodontist. You know, your estates are a little bit crazy. They're going to be more complex. There's a lot more liabilities involved, and there's definitely going to be take place, especially if they own a agreements. There's going to have to be a estate plan. You know, there's going to have to be trusts and all this different steps. And that's why, y'all, estate planning is not just about wills and naming guardians or whatever. It's about a team of, you know, people who can work with you, can look at all the, you know, everything to do with your assets, your family, your goals, your career, everything like that, and make sure that you have a comprehensive plan in place that's going to protect you and your family long term. And it's so much extra important when it's people that are in those high earning professions, especially when they have increased liabilities. So yeah, there's a whole lot of different things, and obviously we just kind of, you know, just knocked on it a little bit, but it's a good starting point, and I think y'all did a really great job of explaining everything. So thanks for hanging in there. Again, I apologize for all the technical difficulties. You know, I guess the internet's maybe just overloaded from COVID, who knows? But I don't think there's any excuse for this. So Charter, if you're listening, you need to fix this issue. But thank you all for joining me, and I think this has been great. So thank you all for joining us, taking the time out of your day to watch this. And again, I know that there are some zone outs, so if you missed any of it, I promise I'll be sending a recording around once I somehow find the way to mesh them all together. So thanks, y'all.